In the quiet market square of Riverdale, an 82-year-old Korean War veteran was about to be surrounded. A sunny Saturday of tomatoes, honey, and small talk turned deadly when the Devil's crew rumbled in, cutting their engines to stock the stalls. Henry Wilson wasn't your typical retiree. For over a year in Korea, he'd served with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, earning a reputation for unflinching resolve under fire. When the Devil's crew shoved him and mocked his service, they had no idea they were stepping into the sightline of Chuck Norris himself. The martial arts icon's calm, precise response dismantled their bravado and set in motion a chain of events that would unite a town and humble its tormentors. What began as a biker gang's cheap display of power would become a lesson in dignity, unity, and real strength. The market and the town would never be the same after that Saturday's showdown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The small town of Riverdale woke to golden sunlight streaming through oak leaves, casting dappled shadows across the farmers' market square. Vendors arranged their wares with practiced hands, glossy red apples stacked in neat pyramids, handcrafted cheeses wrapped in waxed paper, wildflower honey glowing amber in glass jars. The air hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional laugh, all underscored by the gentle melody of a street musician's guitar. Chuck Norris stood at Martha Wilson's honey stand, examining a small mason jar of blackberry honey. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a simple blue button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. A weathered baseball cap pulled low over his eyes completed his unassuming appearance. Nothing about him announced his legendary status exactly as he preferred it. "Morning, Martha," he said, voice low and measured. "The blackberry looks good this season." Martha, a round-faced woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a practical bun, beamed. "Best batch yet, if I do say so. The bees had a good spring." She lowered her voice. "And how's retirement treating you? Still keeping busy, I imagine." Chuck's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he typically came to a full smile. "Keeping busy enough. Garden's coming along. Built that shed I was talking about." Martha nodded, understanding his preference for simplicity. Chuck had moved to Riverdale 3 years ago, seeking quiet after decades in the spotlight. Most locals respected his privacy, treating him like any other neighbor, which was exactly why he'd chosen this place. Across the market square, Henry Wilsono, relation to Martha, despite sharing a last name, made his way carefully between stalls. At 82, the decorated Korean War veteran moved with the deliberate pace of someone who refused to be rushed by age. His spine remained military straight, despite the decades, though his shoulders had begun to stoop slightly. He wore pressed khaki slacks and a button-down shirt, his silver hair neatly combed. Henry paused at Martha's stand, nodding politely to Chuck before turning to the vendor. "Good morning, Martha. Those tomatoes look spectacular today." "Picked them just this morning, Henry," Martha replied warmly. "How's that hip treating you?" "Can't complain," Henry said, though the slight wince as he shifted his weight told a different story. "Doctor says I'm doing well for a man my age." Chuck stepped back, allowing Henry space at the counter. The two men had spoken occasionally, never about their military histories, but with the quiet, mutual respect of those who recognized something familiar in each other. Chuck appreciated Henry's dignity, his refusal to let age diminish his independence. The peaceful market rhythm continued for another 20 minutes. Chuck moved unhurriedly between stalls, picking up fresh vegetables for the week ahead. He nodded to familiar faces, exchanged brief pleasantries with vendors, but mostly kept to himself. At Sarah Thompson's bread stand, he selected a loaf of sourdough, breathing in the yeasty aroma. That's when the first rumble reached his ears. Distant at first, but growing louder, the unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines, not just one but many, approaching fast. Chuck's posture didn't change, but his awareness sharpened. Around the market, conversations paused mid-sentence. Vendors stopped arranging their displays. Parents instinctively drew children closer. Sarah met Chuck's gaze, her expression tightening. "Sounds like the Devil's Crew," she said quietly. "They usually stick to the highway, pass through on their way to the rally in Millerton. Never stop here." The engines grew louder, the rumble becoming a roar as 6 motorcycles rounded the corner onto Main Street. They rode in formazione pointed arrow, with a massive rider on a custom Harley at the tip. The lead bike's chrome gleamed aggressively in the morning sun. Modified exhaust pipes amplifying its growl to thunderous levels. As one, the bikers cut their engines, the sudden silence almost as jarring as the noise had been. They dismounted with practiced coordination, leather vests displaying their colorless snarling devil's face against blood-red flames. "Devil's Crew," arched above in bold letters. The letter, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, surveyed the market with undisguised amusement. Well, he announced to no one in particular, voice carrying across the suddenly quiet square. "Ain't this just the most perfect little slice of American pie?" His crew laughed on cue. They spread out, moving between stalls with exaggerated interest, touching produce without asking, picking up crafts only to set them down carelessly. Vendors stiffened, but said nothing. The atmosphere had transformed in seconds from community warmth to wary tension. Chuck set down his shopping basket, eyes tracking the biker's movements. He remained still, positioned beside a display of wooden crafts, partially obscured but with clear sightlines across the square. Eli Rodriguez, a 16-year-old local who spent most Saturdays helping vendors for extra cash, noticed Chuck's focused attention. The teenager had grown up watching old Walker, Texas Ranger reruns with his father, and had nearly dropped a crate of apples the first time he'd recognized the legend shopping at their market. Now, sensing something in Chuck's alert posture, Eli slipped his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the camera button. Across the market, Henry Wilson continued examining tomatoes, seemingly oblivious to the newcomers. But Chuck noticed the slight stiffening in the old veteran's shoulders, the way his gnarled hands gripped his walking stick a fraction tighter. The leader of the Devil's Crew spotted Henry too. His eyes narrowed, then his mouth curved into a smile that held no warmth. He nudged the biker beside him. A younger man, with a shaved head and hungry eye sand, nodded toward Henry. "Look at that," the leader said, voice pitched to carry. "Somebody's grandpa escaped from the nursing home." Chuck watched as Henry straightened his already straight spine, ignoring the comment. The old veteran placed 2 tomatoes in his basket and moved toward the next stall with unhurried dignity. But the leader wasn't finished. He stepped into Henry's path, forcing the older man to stop abruptly. "In a hurry, Pops?" the leader asked, looking back at his crew with a grin. "What's the rush? Got a hot bingo date?" A ripple of laughter spread through the bikers. The market fell completely silent now, shoppers frozen in place, watching the confrontation unfold. Martha Wilson's face tightened with protective anger. She started forward, but Chuck caught her eye with the barest shake of his head. "Not yet," his expression seemed to say. Henry looked up at the biker leader, meeting his gaze directly. "Excuse me, young man," he said, voice steady despite the 30-year age difference and 100-pound weight disadvantage. "I'd like to pass." The leader's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Young man? You hear that, boys? I'm a young man." He made a show of stepping aside, then stuck out a boot at the last second, nearly tripping Henry. The old veteran caught himself with his walking stick, managing to stay upright but dropping his basket. Tomatoes rolled across the pavement. "Oops," the leader said, making no move to help. "Careful there, Grandpa. Wouldn't want you breaking a hip." Chuck's hand tightened slightly around the wooden craft. He held the only outward sign of his rising anger. His eyes, sharp and focused beneath the brim of his cap, never left the scene unfolding before him. Martha could contain herself no longer. "That's enough," she called out, moving around her stall. "Leave him be." The leader turned toward her, expression darkening. "Well, look here. Grandma's coming to the rescue." He stepped toward Martha, using his bulk to loom over her. "This isn't your business, lady." "Actually," Martha replied, chin raised despite her 5'4" frame, "it is. This is my market stall, and Henry is my friend." One of the bikers, a lanky man with a patchy beard, moved to block Martha's path. "The boss is just having a little fun," he said, voice low. "Why don't you stay behind your counter?" Around the market, shoppers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A few men shifted as if considering intervention, but the intimidating presence of 6 burly bikers kept them hesitating. Henry had managed to recover most of his dropped produce. He straightened slowly, wincing slightly, and looked directly at the leader. "I've met bullies before," he said calmly. "They usually grow out of it. Some just take longer than others." The leader's face flushed beneath his beard. "What did you just say to me, old man?" Henry didn't flinch. "I said you remind me of some boys I knew long ago, before they became men." A dangerous silence fell. The leader stepped closer to Henry, fists clenching at his sides. "You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Henry replied, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent market. "I've seen your kind my whole life." Chuck set down the wooden craft he'd been holding, the soft click of wood against wood barely audible. But something in that small sound, or perhaps something in the shift of his posture, drew the leader's attention. For the first time, the biker leader noticed Chuck, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering crowd. Their eyes met briefly, and something in Chuck's steady gaze made the leader pause. Then the biker grinned, apparently finding new entertainment. "Well, well. Looks like we've got another grandpa who wants to join the party." He gestured toward Chuck. "What about you, cowboy? You got something to say too?" Chuck remained silent, his expression neutral beneath the brim of his cap. The leader's grin widened, taking the silence as fear. "That's what I thought." He turned back to Henry, dismissing Chuck entirely. "Now, where were we, old-timer?" As the morning sun climbed higher over Riverdale's farmers' market, what had begun as a peaceful Saturday was balancing on a knife's edge. The confrontation had drawn everyone's attention now. Even those who had initially tried to continue their shopping stood still, watching with a mixture of concern and helpless fascination. Eli Rodriguez, phone now recording steadily, captured it all from behind a display of handmade quilts. The teenager's hands trembled slightly, but his camera remained focused on the scene, documenting a moment that would soon become something far more than a local disturbance. The biker leader circled Henry like a predator, each step deliberate and theatrical. His crew spread out in a loose semicircle, creating an impromptu arena with Henry at its center. The old veteran stood his ground, walking stick planted firmly before him, dignified despite the growing tension. "You know what I think?" the leader said, voice raised for his audience. "I think we've got ourselves a tough guy here. Probably thinks those campaigns from 100 years ago make him special." Henry's expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of something, not fear, but perhaps sadness, passed through his eyes. "Korea," he said quietly. 1950. 2. Korea. The leader repeated, turning to his crew with exaggerated astonishment. "Hear that, boys? We've got ourselves a genuine war hero." He performed an elaborate mock bow. "Thank you for your service, sir." The sarcasm dripped from every word. A few of the bikers chuckled, though Chuck noticed that not all joined in. Only a stocky man with a graying beard shifted uncomfortably, gaze dropping to the ground. Martha Wilson stepped forward again. "That's enough. You've had your fun. Time to move on." The leader didn't even look at her. We'll leave when we're good and ready, ma'am. The respectful term twisted into an insult through his tone. From across the market, Sarah Thompson's husband Michael approached, his bulk imposing despite his gentle nature. "Folks are trying to shop here," he said. Voice reasonable, but firm. "Why don't you gentlemen continue on your way?" The leader turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Gentlemen? I don't see any gentlemen here. Just my crew and a bunch of small-town folks who don't know how to mind their own business." One of the bikers, the youngest, with a fresh tattoo still shiny on his neck, stepped toward Michael, chest puffed out. "You telling us what to do, big man?" Michael held his ground, but Chuck could see the calculation in his eye. Own man against 6 wasn't favorable odds, no matter his size. "Just suggesting," Michael replied evenly. Chuck moved then. Not toward the confrontation but to the side, positioning himself with clear sightlines to the entire scene. The movement, though subtle, didn't escape the leader's notice. "Look at that," the biker said. Attention diverted from Michael. "Cowboys getting restless." He raised his voice. "Something on your mind over there?" Chuck remained silent, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. The leader's amusement turned to irritation. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" When Chuck still didn't respond, the biker turned back to Henry. "Your friend's not much for conversation, is he?" Henry's expression remained dignified. "Some men talk, others listen. The wise know the difference." The leader's face darkened. "That's supposed to be clever, old man?" He stepped closer, deliberate intimidation in his posture. "You calling me stupid?" "I'm not calling you anything," Henry replied calmly. "Just making an observation." The leader's patience visibly frayed. He reached out and flicked Henry's hat, knocking it askew. "An observation, huh? Here's my observation. You talk pretty big for someone who could break a hip falling off a curb." Henry straightened his hat without comment. But Chuck saw the slight tremor in the old man's hands, not fear, but the effort of restraint. For decades, Henry had carried himself with discipline and dignity. Being treated with such disrespect cut deeper than any physical threat. Around the market, the atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable to tense. Parents guided children away. Some shoppers retreated to the periphery. But no one left entirely, as if some collective instinct told them to bear witness to whatever would unfold. Martha, unable to remain silent, moved toward Henry. "This has gone far enough." The leader's arm shot out, not striking Martha, but blocking her path so abruptly she had to stop short. "The adults are talking, lady." It was the first physically threatening move toward a woman, and it changed something in the air. Michael Thompson took a step forward, and several other men around the market seemed to reach a decision point. The biker leader sensed it too. He glanced around, noted the shifting mood, and made a calculated adjustment. Putting on an exaggerated smile, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, just having a little fun here. No harm done, right?" He turned to Henry, clapping him on the shoulder hard enough to make the old man stagger. "Old-timer and I are just getting acquainted." Henry regained his balance without comment, his expression unchanged. But Chuck, watching carefully, saw the flash of pain that crossed the veteran's face as he steadied himself on his walking stick. That momentary grimace changed something in Chuck's demeanor. His stance shifted, a subtle change that would have been imperceptible to most. But to trained eyes, it signaled readiness. The leader, sensing the market crowd's growing hostility, decided to change tactics. He backed away from Henry with exaggerated courtesy. "Tell you what," he announced loudly. "My boys and I are feeling hungry after our ride. How about we sample some of this famous small-town hospitality I keep hearing about?" Without waiting for response, he moved to Martha's honey stand, examining the jars with theatrical interest. "Homemade? Huh? Bet this costs a fortune in those fancy city stores." He picked up a jar, tossing it casually from hand to hand. Martha watched, lips pressed into a thin line, as the biker set the jar down without replacing the cap, honey slowly oozing onto her clean tablecloth. The crew spread out, following their leader's example. They moved between stalls, picking up produce and artisanal goods, taking bites and setting items down half-eaten. Vendors watched helplessly as the gang treated their livelihoods with casual disregard. The youngest biker approached Eli, who was still filming discreetly from behind the quilt display. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" he demanded, reaching for the phone. Eli stepped back quickly. "Nothing. Just nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." The biker advanced, backing the teenager against the stall. Chuck moved then, not hurriedly, but with purpose, positioning himself where the young biker would notice him. Their eyes met briefly, Chuck's steady gaze containing neither threat nor fear, just focused attention. The young biker hesitated, glancing toward his leader for guidance. "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The leader had returned to Henry, apparently deciding the old veteran was the most entertaining target. "So, Korea, huh?" he said, circling again. "You kill anyone over there, Gramps?" Henry remained silent, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Asked you a question." The leader stepped closer, deliberately invading Henry's personal space. "Did you kill anyone? That's not something men talk about." Henry replied quietly. "Really? 'Cause I've met plenty of veterans who love telling war stories." The leader grinned at his crew. "Usually gets more impressive with every beer." "Then you haven't met real soldiers," Henry said. The leader's amusement vanished. "You questioning my honesty, old man?" "I'm stating a fact," Henry replied evenly. "Men who have seen real combat rarely boast about it." The marketplace had grown utterly silent now, the confrontation drawing all attention. Even the bikers seemed to sense they'd crossed a line, a few exchanging uncertain glances. The leader, however, only grew more agitated. "You know what I think? I think you're full of shit. Probably some desk jockey who never saw a day of real fighting." Henry didn't respond, but something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but a deep weariness, as if he were looking at something far beyond the market square, something decades in the past. The leader, taking the silence as victory, pressed his advantage. "That's what I thought. All talk." He reached out and gave Henry a small shove, not hard enough to knock him down but sufficient to make him step back to maintain balance. Martha gasped. Michael Thompson started forward, but one of the larger bikers moved to intercept him. Around the market, tension stretched to breaking point. Chuck set down his shopping basket, the soft thud drawing the leader's attention. "Oh, look who's suddenly interested," the biker called out. "You got something to say now, cowboy?" Chuck didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Martha, who stood nearest to him. "Would you mind holding this for me?" he asked quietly, removing his cap and handing it to her. Martha took it automatically, her eyes wide. "Chuck," she whispered. "Be careful." The leader's expression changed, recognition dawning. "Chuck! Wait, are you—" He squinted, then let out a bark of laughter. "No way. Is that boys? Is that who I think it is?" The crew looked more carefully now, murmurs spreading between them as they recognized the man standing quietly before them. "Chuck Norris," the leader announced. Theatrical again. "The karate man himself. I used to watch your movies when I was a kid." He spread his arms wide. "What an honor. The great Chuck Norris, shopping at a little farmer's market." His tone made it clear he found the situation amusing rather than intimidating. "Tell me, do they make you do all those stunts yourself, or is it all camera tricks?" Chuck remained silent, his expression neutral as he began walking unhurried but purposeful toward where Henry stood. The leader's amusement turned to annoyance at being ignored. "Hey! I'm talking to you, movie star!" Chuck continued his approach, each step measured and deliberate. Around the market, phones appeared in hands, recording the unfolding scene. Eli, already filming, moved for a better angle. The leader, disliked being disregarded, stepped directly into Chuck's path, using his considerable bulk to create a physical barrier. "You deaf or something?" "I said I'm talking to you." Chuck stopped, looking up to meet the taller man's gaze directly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly in the silent market. "Step aside." Just 2 words, delivered without heat or emphasis, yet they seemed to hang in the air. Something in Chuck's tone, not threatening but absolutely certain, made several of the bikers exchange glances. The leader, however, stood his ground, a sneer forming beneath his beard. "Or what? You gonna roundhouse kick me like in the movies?" He looked around at his crew, playing to his audience. "This ought to be good." Chuck didn't move, didn't blink, just maintained that steady gaze. "I'd like to speak with the gentleman," he said, nodding toward Henry. "Please, step aside." The pleases somehow made it worse, highlighting the power imbalance, not in the biker's favor, but in Chuck's. It was the courtesy of someone who didn't need to be courteous, who chose civility not from weakness but from strength. The leader sensed it too, and it fueled his anger. "You don't give orders here, Norris. This isn't your movie set." One of the older bikers, the one with the graying beard, who had seemed uncomfortable earlier, touched the leader's arm. "Ray, maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Ray snapped, shrugging off the hand without taking his eyes off Chuck. "I'm handling this." The market held its collective breath. Chuck stood perfectly still, his posture neither aggressive nor defensive, simply present, rooted to the spot with absolute certainty. Ray's face flushed darker beneath his beard. "You think I'm scared of you? Because of some movies?" He stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Chuck. "I've put men in the hospital for looking at me wrong." Chuck's expression didn't change. "I'm sure you have." Something in those 4 quiet words, acknowledging the threat without being affected by it, threw Ray off balance. The biker leader hesitated, momentarily uncertain. In that second of hesitation, Chuck simply stepped around him and continued toward Henry. The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that Ray stood frozen for a moment, processing what had happened. By the time he turned, Chuck had reached Henry and was speaking to him in a low voice. "You all right?" Chuck asked the older veteran. Henry nodded once, his dignity intact, despite the confrontation. "I'm fine, thank you." Ray, recovering from his shock, strode after Chuck, grabbing his shoulder roughly. "Hey! We're not done here." What happened next occurred so quickly that many onlookers would later disagree about the exact sequence. Ray's hand closed on Chuck's shoulder, spinning him around. In the next heartbeat, Ray was on one knee, arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Chuck, standing calmly beside him, having barely seemed to move. The marketplace went utterly silent. Even the birds seemed to pause their songs. "My friend and I were talking," Chuck said, his voice still quiet, still controlled. "It's impolite to interrupt." He released Ray's arm and stepped back, returning his attention to Henry, as if nothing had happened. Ray rose slowly, face contorted with humiliation and rage. "You're dead," he growled, reaching toward his belt. Chuck didn't turn, didn't look. "I wouldn't," he said simply. Something in that tone, flat, certain, final, made Ray freeze, hand still at his waistband. The other bikers shifted nervously. The older one with the gray beard stepped forward. "Ray, this isn't worth it. Let's just go." For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Ray's pride warred visibly with his survival instinct. Around the market, shoppers and vendors watched, barely breathing, phones recording every second. Finally, Ray straightened, adjusting his leather vest with exaggerated nonchalance. "Not worth my time anyway," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Come on, boys. This place is boring me." He turned away, striding toward his motorcycle without looking back. His crew followed, some glancing back at Chuck with newfound respect or wariness. As they mounted their bikes, Ray called out one last time, needing to have the final word. "Don't think this is over, Norris." Chuck didn't respond, didn't even turn to watch them leave. Instead, he stood beside Henry, a steady presence, as the bikers' engines roared to life. The Devil's crew pulled away from the market in a cloud of exhaust and noise, Ray's Harley leading the pack. Only when the last motorcycle had disappeared around the corner did the market collectively exhale. Martha approached, still holding Chuck's cap. "That was something," she said, handing it back to him. Chuck accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." He turned to Henry. "Would you like to continue your shopping? I believe you were looking at tomatoes." The normalcy of the question, after such tension, broke the spell. Around the market, conversations resumed. First in whispers, then in normal tones. Vendors returned to their stalls, shoppers to their browsing, though with frequent glances toward Chuck and Henry. Eli lowered his phone, checking to make sure he'd captured everything. The teenager's hands trembled slightly with leftover adrenaline, but his face shone with something like awe. Henry looked at Chuck, a hint of a smile touching his weathered face. "I think I was. And I believe Martha has some particularly fine honey this morning." As they walked together toward Martha's stall, Chuck replaced his cap, pulling it low over his eyes once more. Just another Saturday at the market, though, for everyone present. It would be a Saturday they would remember for years to come. The market gradually returned to its normal rhythm over the next half hour. Vendors resumed their calls, shoppers continued filling baskets with fresh produce, and conversations flowed freely once more. But beneath the surface calm, an undercurrent of excitement remained. Glances followed Chuck as he moved between stalls, completing his shopping with the same unhurried pace as before the confrontation. Henry walked alongside him, their conversation light and unforced. To casual observers, they might have been any two men enjoying a Saturday morning, not the center of what would soon become a local legend. At Martha's honey stand, Chuck selected a jar of blackberry honey and one of wildflower. Henry chose a small jar of clover honey, insisting on paying despite Martha's attempts to give it as a gift. "My father taught me never to take what I can pay for," Henry explained, counting out exact change from a worn leather wallet. Martha accepted with a nod of understanding. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Henry agreed quietly. "Fought in the First World War. Came back changed, like most did, but never lost his principles." Chuck listened without comment, but his eyes reflected respect for the older veteran. When Henry finished his purchase, they moved on together toward the bread stall. Eli Rodriguez had stopped filming but remained nearby, pretending to help rearrange a display of handcrafted wooden bowls while stealing glances at the two men. When Chuck looked directly at him, the teenager flushed and dropped his gaze. Chuck approached, Henry beside him. "You got some good footage," he said. Not a question, but an observation. Eli swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. It just seemed like something people should see." Chuck studied the boy for a moment, then nodded once. "Sometimes that's true." He paused. "What do you plan to do with it?" "I don't know yet," Eli admitted. "Maybe nothing. Or maybe, I don't know, share it locally? People should know what happened." Henry spoke up. "The truth rarely needs help spreading, young man. It tends to find its own way." Eli considered this, looking from Henry to Chuck. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "I'll think about that." Chuck's expression softened slightly. What's your name? Eli Rodriguez, sir. Eli, Chuck repeated, committing it to memory. You showed good instincts today. Staying back. Documenting without interfering. That takes discipline. The teenager straightened at the praise. Thank you, sir. Chuck nodded once more, then continued toward the bread stand with Henry, leaving Eli staring after them with newfound determination in his eyes. The morning stretched toward noon, the sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. Chuck and Henry completed their shopping, each with a modest basket of goods. They paused at the edge of the market square, preparing to part ways. Can I offer you a ride home? Chuck asked. My truck's just around the corner. Henry shook his head. Thank you. But I enjoy the walk. Doctor says it's good for my hip. His eyes crinkled with humor. Besides, it's only 3 blocks. Chuck nodded, respecting the older man's independence. Another time, perhaps. I'd like that, Henry replied. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Thank you. Not for the offer for earlier. It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me like that. Chuck clasped the offered hand firmly. You stood up for yourself first. That's what matters. They parted ways, Henry heading east toward the residential area, while Chuck turned west toward the parking lot where he'd left his truck. The market continued its business behind them, though many eyes followed their departure. Chuck had just reached the corner when he heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines, growing louder by the second. He paused, turning back toward the market square. Henry had heard it too. The old veteran stopped, his posture stiffening as he recognized the sound. Around the market, conversations faltered once more. Vendors exchanged worried glances. Martha stepped out from behind her stall, scanning the street with apprehension. The rumble grew to a roar as the Devil's crew rounded the corner, this time with 3 additional bikes, bringing their number to 9. They formed a V-shaped formation with Ray at the point, rolling slowly down Main Street toward the market. This time, they didn't stop at the edge of the square. Instead, they rode directly into the market area, weaving between stalls with deliberate intimidation, forcing shoppers to jump back. They circled once, engines deafening in the confined space, before cutting power simultaneously. The sudden silence felt ominous. Ray dismounted, removing his helmet and scanning the crowd until he spotted Chuck, who had returned to the market's edge. A slow, dangerous smile spread beneath the biker's beard. Thought we were done? He called out. I told you it wasn't over. Chuck didn't respond, but his attention was focused on Henry, who stood exposed in the open area between stalls, his walking stick planted firmly before him. Ray followed Chuck's gaze, his smile widening when he spotted the elderly veteran. Well, look who's still here. The war hero. He started toward Henry with deliberate steps. Chuck moved too, not hurrying but positioning himself to intercept Ray's path. The biker leader saw him coming and changed direction, gesturing for 2 of his crew to continue toward Henry instead. This time I came prepared, Ray announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. You got lucky before, Norris. Won't happen again. The market crowd backed away, creating an open circle around the confrontation. Phones appeared again, recording from a safer distance. Eli, who had never truly put his phone away, filmed openly now, capturing every moment. The 2 bikers Ray had directed, the young one with the fresh neck tattoo and a burlier man with a shaved head, approached Henry from opposite sides. Time to teach Grandpa some respect, the younger one said, cracking his knuckles theatrically. Henry stood his ground, eyes moving between the 2 men with calm assessment. For a man in his 80s, his focus was remarkably no fear, just calculation. Chuck continued his approach, unhurried, but purposeful. Ray moved to intercept him, 3 more bikers flanking their leader. 4 against 1, Ray said, grinning. Even a movie star can't beat those odds. Chuck stopped, his stance casual but balanced. You should leave, he said quietly. Now, Ray laughed. Or what? You gonna call the cops? By the time they get here, we'll be done with our business. He glanced toward Henry, where his 2 crew members were closing in. And your old friend over there might need an ambulance. Around the market, several shoppers had indeed pulled out phones, calling the local sheriff's department. But Riverdale was small, its law enforcement limited. Help would take time to arrive. Chuck's gaze remained steady. I'm not going to call anyone. Something in his tone quiet certainty without bravado made Ray hesitate, just for a moment. Then the biker leader's face hardened. Get him! He ordered the men beside him. The 3 bikers moved forward together, spreading out to approach Chuck from different angles. Their confidence was evident, 3 younger, larger men against 1 aging martial artist. What happened next would later be described differently by various witnesses. But all would agree on one thing. It was over, almost before it began. The first biker reached Chuck, swinging a meaty fist in a roundhouse punch. Chuck simply wasn't there when the blow should have landed. A minimal shift of his body, efficient and economical. The biker's momentum carried him forward, off balance, and Chuck's hand moved once, a short strike to the kidney that folded the man like a closing book. The second and third attacked simultaneously. Chuck moved between them, his actions so precise they seemed choreographed. A deflection here, a redirected force there. He hardly seemed to strike at all. Yet both men ended up on the ground, one clutching his knee, the other trying to regain the breath that had been driven from his lungs. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. Ray stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. The casual confidence drained from his face, replaced by dawning understanding of the situation he had created. Across the market, a different confrontation was unfolding. The 2 bikers who had approached Henry had expected an easy target, an old man with a walking stick, someone to intimidate for their leader's amusement. They hadn't expected what happened next. As the younger biker reached for Henry's arm, the elderly veteran pivoted with surprising agility. His walking stick, previously used for support, swept in a practiced arc, catching the biker behind the ankle. A subtle shift of weight, a controlled pull on the stick, and the young man was suddenly airborne, landing hard on his back with a shocked expression. The second biker froze mid-step, staring at his fallen comrade, then at the old man who now held the walking stick in a distinctly different grip, not the casual hold of an elderly pedestrian, but the balanced stance of someone who knew exactly how to use it as a weapon. Korean War, Henry said quietly. 1950. 2. 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. His eyes held decades of experience. The younger man couldn't begin to comprehend. We had time to practice. The biker hesitated, calculation replacing bravado. Before he could decide on his next move, Chuck appeared beside Henry, having crossed the market space with that same unhurried yet inexorable pace. Everything all right here? Chuck asked, as casually as if they were discussing the weather. Henry nodded, his posture relaxing slightly, but the grip on his walking stick still firm. Just explaining some history to these young men. The fallen biker scrambled to his feet, backing away with considerably less swagger than he'd approached with. His partner followed suit, both retreating toward where Ray stood, surrounded by his groaning crew members. The market square had gone completely silent. Every person present, vendors, shoppers, even the remaining bikers who hadn't joined the attack, stood motionless, witnessing something they instinctively understood was extraordinary. Ray looked from his fallen men to Chuck and Henry, then to the phones recording his humiliation. His face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "This isn't over," he shouted, the declaration hollow even to his own ears. "Nobody makes a fool of me. You managed that yourself." Martha called from her stall, her earlier fear replaced by righteous indignation. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The market's collective courage had returned, bolstered by what they'd just witnessed. Ray's gaze darted around the square, searching for some way to salvage his pride. Finding none, he backed toward his motorcycle, gesturing for his crew to do the same. "We're leaving," he announced, as if it were his decision rather than his only option. "This town's not worth our time anyway." His fallen comrades limped to their bikes, pride more injured than bodies. The Devil's crew mounted up with considerably less coordination than their arrival had shown, several wincing as they settled onto their seats. Ray's engine roared to life first, unnecessarily loud in the quiet market. "Don't think we'll forget this," he called out. One final attempt to save face. Chuck and Henry stood side by side, watching impassively as the bikers prepared to depart. Neither spoke. Neither moved, their stillness more powerful than any threat. The Devil's crew pulled away in a cloud of exhaust and noise, their exit lacking the intimidating formation of their arrival. They scattered slightly as they reached the main road, regrouping beyond the town limits where their embarrassment wouldn't be on display. As the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner, the market remained silent, for one more heartbeat erupted in spontaneous applause. The tension broke like a fever, relief and amazement pouring out in equal measure. Martha rushed forward, followed by several other vendors and shoppers, surrounding Chuck and Henry with gratitude and excitement. "That was amazing!" someone called out. "Did you see how fast he moved? The way Mr. Wilson used his cane, incredible." Chuck accepted the praise with quiet nods, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Henry stood straighter, his dignity restored, acknowledging the kind words with gracious smiles. Eli weaved through the crowd, phone still recording. "Mr. Norris, Mr. Wilson, that was incredible. The way you guys handled those biker sit was like something out of a movie, but real." Chuck glanced at the teenager's phone, a hint of resignation in his expression. "That recording is going to be seen by a lot of people, I imagine," Henry finished for him, surprising Chuck with his acceptance. "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing." Chuck studied the older veteran thoughtfully. "No?" Henry shook his head. "There are lessons worth sharing." He looked around at the gathered crowd, at the market that had nearly been destroyed by thoughtless aggression. About respect. About how true strength carries itself. Chuck considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." The crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their shopping with animated conversations about what they'd witnessed. Chuck and Henry found themselves at the center of a small circle of well-wishers, accepting thanks and fielding questions with patient good humor. Eventually, the excitement settled enough for them to complete their interrupted departure. They walked together toward the market's edge, where they had been heading before the bikers' return. "Still want to walk home?" Chuck asked Henry, a hint of humor in his voice. Henry chuckled. "After that? I think I could run the 3 blocks." He grew more serious. "But I wouldn't say no to that ride offer now. These old bones have had enough excitement for one day." Chuck nodded, falling into step beside the older man. "My truck's this way." As they walked, Henry glanced sideways at his companion. "You know, I've watched your films. Never thought I'd be in one, so to speak." Chuck smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes this time. "Life has interesting chapters sometimes." "That it does," Henry agreed. "That it does." By Monday morning, Eli Rodriguez's video had spread far beyond Riverdale's boundaries. What had begun as local footage shared among friends had exploded overnight, picked up by social media accounts specializing in viral content, then by regional news stations, and finally, by national outlets. Chuck Norris defends elderly veteran from biker gang. Read the headlines, accompanied by clips from Eli's remarkably steady recording. The teenager found himself fielding interview requests from reporters, his phone buzzing constantly with notifications. In the quiet of his ranch-style home on Riverdale's outskirts, Chuck went about his morning routine as usual: coffee at sunrise, followed by an hour of meditation, then garden work while the day was still cool. He had deliberately avoided checking his phone, knowing what he would find there. When the first knock came at his door around 9, he wasn't surprised. Martha Wilson stood on his porch, a basket of fresh muffins in her hands and concern in her eyes. "You've seen it, I expect," she said, without preamble, as he invited her in. "Not yet," Chuck replied, leading her to his kitchen and putting on a fresh pot of coffee. "But I figured it was coming." Martha set the basket on his counter, removed her light jacket, and took a seat at the small breakfast table. "It's everywhere, Chuck. That boy's video has become something of a local celebrity overnight." Chuck nodded, unsurprised. "Good kid. Steady hands." "Too steady, maybe," Martha said with a wry smile. "The footage is very clear. No mistaking who's who or what happened." The coffee finished brewing, and Chuck poured 2 mugs, setting one before Martha. "How's Henry taking it?" "Better than you might expect," Martha replied, adding a splash of cream to her coffee. "Sarah Thompson called him this morning. Her daughter works at the senior center. Said the residents there are treating him like a returning hero." Again, Chuck smiled at that. A small but genuine expression. "Good. He deserves the recognition." Martha studied him over the rim of her mug. "And you? How are you handling the attention?" Chuck shrugged, his expression neutral once more. "It'll pass. These things always do." "Not always," Martha countered gently. "Not when it resonates with people the way this has." Before Chuck could respond, another knock sounded at his door, more insistent this time. He rose to answer it. Martha, following curiously. Sheriff Tom Gardner stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Behind him, parked on the gravel driveway, sat his official vehicle, its light bar dark but its presence unmistakable. "Morning, Chuck," the sheriff said, nodding to Martha as well. "Mrs. Wilson." "Sheriff," Chuck acknowledged, opening the door wider. "Come in. Coffee's fresh." Gardner stepped inside but remained standing in the entryway, clearly not planning a social visit. "I expect you know why I'm here." Chuck nodded. "The market. Saturday." "The market. Saturday. And about 3 million views online as of an hour ago," Gardner confirmed, with a grimace. "I've had reporters calling my office since dawn. Most from out of state." Martha made a soft sound of dismay. "That many already?" The sheriff nodded. "Afraid so. And that's not the only reason I'm here." He straightened, shifting to a more official posture. "I need to talk to you about the Devil's Crew, Chuck." Something in his tone made Chuck study the lawman more carefully. "What about them?" Gardner glanced at Martha, then back to Chuck. "We've got reports they've been causing trouble one county over. Specifically looking for information about you, where you live, your routines." Martha gasped softly. "Surely they wouldn't." "They would," Gardner interrupted grimly. "Ray Mercer's got a reputation throughout the state. Holds grudges like most people hold on to cash tightly, and for as long as possible." Chuck absorbed this information without visible reaction. "I see. I'm increasing patrols in your area," the sheriff continued. "And I've put in calls to the state police. But our resources are limited, as you know." Chuck nodded once. "I appreciate the warning, Tom, but I don't think there's cause for concern." Gardner studied him, then sighed. "Maybe not for you, but I'd feel better if you stayed alert. These aren't movie villains, Chuck. They're real people with real tempers and something to prove." "I understand," Chuck said quietly. The sheriff seemed satisfied with this response. He declined the offered coffee, claiming a busy schedule, and departed with a final warning to be careful. When the door closed behind him, Martha turned to Chuck, worry etched on her face. He's right, you know. These men, they don't think like reasonable people. Chuck led her back to the kitchen, his expression thoughtful. Few people do when pride is involved. This isn't just pride, Martha insisted. That man, Wraith, way he looked at you. It was hatred, Chuck. Pure hatred. Chuck refilled his coffee mug, considering her words. Hatred requires personal connection. He doesn't know me to hate me. He knows you humiliated him, Martha countered. For some men, that's more than enough. Before Chuck could respond, his phone rang, an unusual occurrence in itself, as few people had his private number. He glanced at the screen, then answered immediately. Henry, he greeted. Everything all right? Martha watched as Chuck listened, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. Finally, he said, I'll be right there, and ended the call. What is it? Martha asked, already reaching for her jacket. Someone vandalized Henry's house last night, Chuck replied, grabbing his truck keys from a hook by the door. Spray painted his front door, broke some windows. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. The Devil's Crew? That would be my guess, Chuck confirmed grimly. Want to come along? Of course, Martha said, already heading for the door. They drove in silence through Riverdale's quiet streets, each absorbed in their own thoughts. When they reached Henry's modest bungalow, the damage was immediately visible. Spray paint across the white door spelled out, War Hero, in mocking letters. And 2 front windows had been shattered, glass glittering on the porch in the morning sun. Henry stood in the doorway, broom in hand, attempting to sweep up the broken glass. He looked up as Chuck's truck pulled into the driveway, offering a tired smile. Sorry to bother you, he called as Chuck and Martha approached. Sheriff's already been by. Not much they can do without witnesses. Martha immediately took the broom from his hands. Let me handle this, Henry. You shouldn't be breathing in this dust. Henry relinquished the broom with a grateful nod, turning to Chuck. It happened sometime after midnight. Didn't hear a thing. Sleeping pills, he explained. Doctor prescribed them for my hip pain. Chuck surveyed the damage, his expression unreadable. Anyone else in the neighborhood have trouble? Just me, Henry confirmed. Sheriff thinks it was targeted. A message. For you or for me? Chuck asked quietly. Henry met his gaze directly. Both of us, I'd say. Inside Henry's living room, they assessed the situation over cups of tea that Martha insisted on preparing. The vandalism was limited to the front of the house, clearly meant to be seen, a public statement rather than serious damage. They'll be back, Henry said matter-of-factly. Men like that always come back. Chuck nodded, accepting this assessment. The question is when? And how many? Martha added, worry clear in her voice. Sheriff Gardner said they've been recruiting. That video made Ray look weak. He'll want to restore his reputation. Henry set down his teacup with a decisive click. Well, he can't have it at my expense. Or yours, Chuck. Chuck studied the older veteran thoughtfully. What are you thinking? A hint of the military strategist emerged in Henry's expression. I'm thinking we don't wait for them to choose the time and place. Martha looked between the 2 men, concern deepening. What does that mean exactly? Henry smiled a small, determined expression that belied his age. It means we prepare, and we control the narrative. Chuck raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. That boy with the phone? Eli. Henry began. He captured the first round of this story. I think it's time we wrote the conclusion ourselves. Over the next hour, a plan took shape. No, a confrontation but a statement. A way to redirect the energy that had been building since Saturday's market incident. By the time they finished talking, Martha's initial worry had transformed into cautious support, and Chuck's usual reserve had given way to quiet approval. It might work, he acknowledged. But it depends on how Ray Mercer responds. Henry's eyes gleamed with the wisdom of his years. Men like that are predictable in their unpredictability. He'll come at us head-on, trying to regain what he lost. Our job is to make sure he has an off-ramp, a way to save face without violence. Chuck nodded slowly. And if he doesn't take it? Then we deal with that too, Henry said simply. Martha looked from one man to the other, shaking her head with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. You two are cut from the same cloth, aren't you? Neither man denied it. As they finalized their approach, Eli Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. The message was brief but would change everything. This is Chuck Norris. We need to talk about your video and what happens next. Across town, in a dingy bar just beyond Riverdale's limits, Ray Mercer nursed his third beer of the morning, surrounded by his increasingly uneasy crew. The Devils had always followed Ray's lead without question. His size, his fearlessness, his willingness to cross lines others wouldn't had earned their loyalty. But Saturday had shaken that foundation. They'd seen their invincible leader taken down in seconds by a man old enough to be their father or in some cases grandfather. They'd watched as their intimidation tactics failed completely against quiet confidence and disciplined skill. We're going back, Ray announced, slamming his empty bottle onto the scratched wooden table. Tonight. And this time, we finish it. The older biker with the graying beard, Mike, the closest thing to a voice of reason in the crew, cleared his throat. Ray, maybe we should let this one go. That video's everywhere. Cops'll be watching for us. Ray's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. You scared, Mike? After all these years, you turning yellow on me? Mike didn't flinch from the accusation. Not scared. Smart. There's a difference. Well, I'm going, Ray declared, looking around the table at his crew. With or without you. That old man and his movie star buddy humiliated us. Nobody does that to the Devil's crew. The youngest member, Joey, still sporting bandages on his scraped knuckles from Saturday's encounter, nodded eagerly. I'm with you, Ray. We can't let them make us look weak. One by one, the others murmured agreement, some more reluctantly than others. Only Mike remained silent, studying his beer with a troubled expression. Ray noticed. Something to say, Mike? The older biker looked up, meeting Ray's challenging stare. Just wondering what the end game is here. You planning to beat up an 80-year-old war vet? Or take on Chuck Norris with the whole town watching? How exactly does that make us look strong? A heavy silence fell over the table. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Ray's face, then hardened into something darker. We do what we have to, he said finally. To protect our reputation. Mike drained his beer and stood up. Then you'll do it without me. He tossed a few bills on the table. I'm out. Ray didn't try to stop him as he walked away, but his expression promised consequences. When the bar door closed behind Mike, Ray turned back to his remaining crew. Anyone else feeling squeamish? No one spoke. No one moved. Ray's smile returned, cold and determined. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. As afternoon faded into evening, the pieces of Henry's plan fell into place. Eli Rodriguez had arrived at Chuck's ranch within an hour of receiving the text. Equal parts nervous and excited. By sunset, word had spread through carefully chosen channels about a community gathering planned for the following evening at the Market Square, a show of support for Henry and other veterans, organized by the town's younger residents. The bait was set. Now they would see if Ray Mercer was predictable enough to take it. Tuesday evening painted Riverdale's Market Square in golden light. What had begun as a small gesture of solidarity had swelled into something larger. Tables lined the perimeter, laden with potluck dishes, folding chairs created informal seating, and strings of lights hung between stalls awaited dusk. Signs proclaimed, "Honoring our veterans," and "Riverdale stands together." Someone had hung an American flag from the central gazebo. The atmosphere carried a blend of community pride and patriotic sentiment. Eli Rodriguez moved through the gathering crowd, camera in hand. His original video had surpassed 5 million views. But tonight wasn't about viral fame. Tonight was about something more important. Henry Wilson arrived just after 6, walking without his cane despite his hip pain. He had insisted on making the journey on foot, refusing offered rides. He wore a pressed blue shirt with his Marine Corps pin on the collar knot, his full uniform or medals, just the simple acknowledgement of his service. The crowd parted respectfully as he approached, several people reaching out to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. Henry accepted their greetings with quiet dignity, moving steadily toward the gazebo where a microphone had been set up. Martha intercepted him halfway. "Right on time," she said. "Everything's ready. We've got about 200 people already." Henry looked around, momentarily overwhelmed by the turnout. "I never expected this many." Martha smiled. "You underestimate how much this town respects you. Always have." "And Chuck?" "In position," Martha confirmed. "He'll be here when needed." As Henry approached the gazebo, the crowd fell silent. He stood straight, despite his years, surveying the gathered townspeople with clear eyes. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady. "I'm told this gathering is in my honor, but that's not entirely accurate." He paused, letting his gaze travel across the faces before him. "This gathering is about something larger. It's about community, about standing together, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself with noise or intimidation." The crowd listened intently, drawn in by his sincerity. "I served in Korea over 70 years ago," Henry continued. "What I learned there, what I've carried with me all these years, is that true courage isn't about fearlessness. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." At the edge of the square, a rumble began distant at first, then growing louder. Motorcycle engines, approaching from the east. Henry paused, then continued with renewed purpose. "That's the message I want to share tonight. In a world that often seems to reward the loudest voice, remember that true strength lies in dignity, in integrity, in community." The Devil's crew rounded the corner onto Main Street, their formation tight and purposeful. Ray Mercer led the pack, his massive Harley gleaming under the early evening light. Behind him rode 12 bikers more than before, their reinforced numbers a clear statement of intent. They slowed as they approached the market square, engines downshifting to a menacing growl. Some in the crowd began to disperse, parents hurrying children away, others reaching for phones. Henry watched their approach without flinching. "What you're witnessing is a choice. Those men approaching us now are making a choice to respond to perceived disrespect with intimidation." The bikers pulled to a stop at the market's edge, their semicircle formation blocking the eastern exit. Ray dismounted first, scanning the crowd with undisguised contempt. "And we," Henry said, his voice carrying clearly, "are making a different choice, to stand together, to respond not with fear or anger, but with dignity and resolve." Ray spotted Henry at the gazebo. He gestured to his crew, and they dismounted as one, creating an intimidating line at the market's edge. "Look at them," Ray called out, voice deliberately loud. "Having a little party for the war hero. Isn't that sweet?" His crew laughed on cue, though several looked uncomfortable with the number of witnesses present. Henry didn't respond to the taunt, continuing to address the townspeople who now stood in an uncertain huddle before the gazebo. "Community isn't tested when things are easy," he said, voice never wavering. "It's tested in moments like this when we must decide who we are, what we stand for, and how we respond to those who would divide us." Ray strode forward, his crew following more hesitantly. "Where's your bodyguard, old man? Did Norris decide you weren't worth his time?" Several people formed a protective barrier between the bikers and the ordinary townspeople standing their ground. Henry finally acknowledged Ray directly. "Mr. Mercer, I was hoping you might join us tonight." The use of his name caught Ray off guard. "You what? Join us?" Henry repeated, gesturing to the gathering. "There's plenty of food. Good conversation. You and your friends are welcome if you come in peace." Ray stared at him, momentarily speechless. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected. "Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded. "You think we came here for your potluck dinner?" Henry regarded him steadily. "I think you came here looking for something: respect, perhaps. Recognition. A chance to rewrite Saturday's events." Several of Ray's crew exchanged uncomfortable glances. The older veteran had articulated their leader's motivation with uncomfortable precision. "We don't need your amateur psychology, Grandpa." Ray sneered. "Where's Norris? Too scared to show his face?" "I'm right here." The quiet voice came from behind the biker crew. They turned to find Chuck Norris standing at the market's entrance. Hands relaxed at his sides, expression neutral beneath his cap. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood Sheriff Gardner and 2 deputies. Flanking them were 5 oldermen veterans from Riverdale and neighboring towns. And beside them stood Mike Ray's former second-in-command, now clearly aligned with the opposition. Ray's face contorted with rage and betrayal. "Mike! What the hell are you doing?" Mike stepped forward. "The right thing, Ray." For once. He gestured to the gathering. "Look around you. This isn't a fight worth having. These people aren't your enemies." Chuck spoke again, his voice carrying easily. "You have a choice, Ray. We all do. You can leave now, peacefully. And that's the end of it. No charges, no consequences." Sheriff Gardner confirmed this with a nod. "Consider it a one-time offer." "Or what?" Ray challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or," Chuck continued calmly, "you can stay. Join the gathering. Have some food. Listen to Henry and these veterans talk about service, about community, about the kind of strength that builds rather than destroys." Ray stared at him in disbelief. "You're inviting us to stay? After everything?" Chuck nodded once. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Even you." A long silence stretched across the market square. Everyone waited for Ray's decision. Finally, the biker leader looked at his Kriwat, their uncertain faces, their clear reluctance to escalate, and made his choice. "This is bullshit," he muttered. But the fight had gone from his voice. "Let's go. This town's not worth our time." Mike didn't move to join them. "I'm staying, Ray." Ray's expression hardened. "Then you're out. For good." As the Devil's crew mounted up, Ray fixed Chuck with a final glare. "Don't think this makes us friends, Norris." Chuck's expression remained neutral. "Wasn't offering friendship. Just offering peace." The bikers pulled away, their exit lacking the intimidating formation of their arrival. As the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner, the market remained silent for one heartbeat and erupted in spontaneous applause. Chuck and Henry exchanged a glance of quiet understanding. Neither needed to speak to recognize what they had witnessed, not just the departure of a threat, but the emergence of something stronger. A community that had learned to stand together, not in aggression, but in dignity. As the evening progressed, the gathering transformed from potential confrontation to genuine celebration. Tables filled with people sharing food and conversation. Children played between market stalls. The string lights came on as dusk deepened, casting a warm glow over the square. In that warm light, surrounded by the community they had helped strengthen, Chuck and Henry embodied the lesson they had taught, that true power lies not in intimidation, but in connection. Not in volume, but in values. Not in force, but in the quiet certainty of knowing who you are and what you stand for. 3 months passed, carrying Riverdale from summer into autumn. The farmers' market continued its weekly rhythm, though with notable changes. Chuck Norris no longer moved anonymously through the stalls. Vendors greeted him by name, shoppers nodded respectfully, and children sometimes approached for shy handshakes. Henry Wilson had become something of a local celebrity as well. His back remained straight despite his years, and he moved through the market with a different presence, just respected but beloved, a living embodiment of the quiet dignity the town had come to value. On this particular October morning, with leaves turning gold and crimson on the surrounding trees, Chuck arrived at the market earlier than usual to meet with Eli Rodriguez. The teenager had transformed from enthusiastic videographer to thoughtful young documentarian in the months since his video had gone viral. Eli waited at Martha's honey stand, a tablet in his hands, dressed more neatly than his usual casual attire. "Mr. Norris," he greeted Chuck with a respectful nod. "Thanks for meeting me. You said you had something to show me?" Eli's expression brightened. "Yes, sir. It's finished, the documentary. I wanted you and Mr. Wilson to be the first to see it before it goes online next week." Over the past months, Eli's initial viral video had evolved into something more ambitious, a documentary about Riverdale, the confrontation with the Devil's Crew, and the themes of community and quiet strength that had emerged from those events. Henry arrived moments later, walking steadily with his canoes, now more as a precaution than a necessity. Beside him walked Mike, the former biker who had remained in Riverdale, now running his own motorcycle repair shop on the edge of town. They gathered around the table as Eli positioned his tablet where everyone could see. A small crowd of interested onlookers gradually formed, vendors taking breaks, regular shoppers pausing in their rounds, all drawn by curiosity and community connection. "It's about 20 minutes long," Eli explained, suddenly nervous. "I've entered it in a few student film festivals, but your opinions matter more to me." The documentary began not with the confrontation, but with dawn breaking over Riverdale, time-lapse footage of the market coming to life, vendors setting up their stalls, the first shoppers arriving as morning lights spilled across the square. Voices overlapped in gentle narration. Martha describing the market's history, Michael Thompson reflecting on the town's character, residents sharing their connections to the community. Riverdale emerged not as a backdrop but as a character in its own right. Place with identity, with values, with underlying strength often unnoticed until tested. Eli had edited carefully, focusing not on the spectacle of confrontation but on the moments of choice, the subtle expressions, the decisions that had determined the outcome. The film expanded beyond the initial incidents to capture the emergence of Chuck's self-defense class, Mike's integration into the town, and the subtle but significant ways Riverdale had been changed by what they had experienced together. As the screen faded to black and credits rolled, silence held for a long moment, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something too meaningful for immediate words. "Well done, young man," Henry said finally, his voice slightly rough with emotion. "Very well done indeed." Mike cleared his throat. "Yeah, kid. It's real. You got it right." Eli looked to Chuck, whose opinion he valued perhaps most of all. "Mr. Norris?" Chuck studied the young filmmaker. "You found the story behind the story," he said. "Not many people can do that." Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Gardner, approaching with a man in a neat but casual suit that immediately marked him as an outsider. "Morning all," the sheriff greeted them. "This gentleman was asking after you, Chuck. Said it was important." The stranger stepped forward. "Mr. Norris, I'm Daniel Mercer, Ray's brother." The name created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Mike straightened, wariness replacing his relaxed posture. Chuck simply studied the man, noting the physical resemblance to Ray but also the significant differences in bearing. "What can I do for you?" Chuck asked. "It's about Ray. He's in the hospital," It's not good. What happened? Mike asked. Accident on his bike 2 weeks ago. He was coming back from a rally, took a curve too fast in the rain. He's been in intensive care ever since. The news settled heavily over the group. Despite everything, none of them wished such harm on the biker leader. Ray's been asking for you, Mr. Norris? Daniel continued. I know it sounds strange after everything, but he keeps saying he needs to talk to you. Why me? Chuck asked. I don't know exactly. He won't say much to me or the doctors. Daniel paused. The doctors say he might not have much time left. Chuck glanced at Henry, a brief exchange of unspoken thoughts passing between them. Where is he? County General, about 40 miles west. I'll come. Today. An hour later, Henry's Buick carried Chuck, Henry, and Eli westward. County General Hospital rose like a beige monolith against the autumn sky, its architecture utilitarian rather than welcoming. Daniel led them through sterile corridors to intensive care. Through the glass partition, they could see Ray Mercer diminished somehow, connected to monitors and IVs, his imposing physical presence reduced by injury and illness. They entered quietly. Ray's eyes opened slowly, taking a moment to focus. Recognition dawned, gradually first confusion, then clarity, then something more complex. You came, he said, his voice rasping and weak. All of you. Your brother said you wanted to talk, Chuck said simply. Ray nodded slightly, the movement causing pain. Didn't think you'd actually show up. Here we are, Henry said. Standing at the foot of the bed, his dignity unchanged. I've had a lot of time to think, Ray began. Lying here, not sure if I'm going to make it out, makes a man see things differently. He met Chuck's gaze directly. That day in your town I came looking for trouble. But what I found instead wasn't what I expected. What did you find? Henry asked quietly. Something I didn't understand then. All my life, I thought power came from making people afraid. From being the loudest, the strongest, the most willing to cross lines. Ray looked at the three of them. But you showed me something else. A different kind of strength. One I never learned. The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ray clarified. Don't expect it, don't deserve it. Just wanted you to know. I see it now. What I was missing. Chuck nodded once. It's never too late to learn. In my case, Ray said with a grimace, might be cutting it close. The conversation had clearly taxed Ray's limited strength. As they prepared to leave, Ray roused himself one last time. Norris. One more thing. Chuck turned back. Yes? A ghost of Ray's old smirk appeared, transformed now into something more genuine. In those movies of yours, the stunts, real or fake? Chuck's expression softened into the hint of a smile. Mostly real. Some exaggerated. Ray nodded, satisfied. Thought so. His eyes closed, energy depleted. The drive back to Riverdale was largely silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The autumn landscape passed by the windows, fields harvested down to stubble. Trees in full color. The world preparing for its annual cycle of ending and renewal. As the day ended, Chuck and Henry completed their interrupted shopping, greeted warmly by the Riverdale community that had embraced them both. You know, Henry said as they paused at the bread stall, what happened here wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about demonstrating an alternative. An alternative? Chuck prompted. Henry gestured around them at the bustling market. To the idea that strength must be loud, aggressive, dominant. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't need to shout, the one that carries naturally because it speaks truth, because it comes from a place of genuine integrity. As they prepared to part ways, Henry with his modest basket of produce, Chuck with his week's supplies, They paused at the market's edge. The setting sun painted the square in golden light, transforming the ordinary scene into something quietly magnificent. "Same time? Next Saturday?" Henry asked, though the question had become largely rhetorical over the months. Chuck nodded, adjusting his cap against the lowering sun. "I'll be here." "And Henry?" The older veteran paused. "Yes? Thank you," Chuck said simply. Henry smiled, understanding all that remained unspoken between them. "That's what community is for, Chuck. Reminding us who we are when we forget." They parted ways as the market began to close, vendors packing up, shoppers heading home, the square gradually emptying as dusk approached. But something remained even as the people departed: an invisible strength, a quiet certainty, a shared understanding of what truly matters. In a world that often mistakes volume for power, that silent certainty might be the most revolutionary force of all. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.